Bruce Hall has the latest on today's high-tech low comedy.
We are going to scrub for today.
And the confidence in NASA's ability to maintain a launch schedule has been rocked by this series of embarrassing technical snafus and weather delays.
Well, of course, it was just not our day.
And it has not been NASA's month. In early January, it took 7 attempts to get Columbia and her crew into orbit, and there were 2 delays getting them back. And this week's effort to get Challenger into orbit has turned into a comedy of errors. Sunday's launch was canceled when rain was predicted, but by lunchtime, the skies were clear and the weather ideal. NASA admitted they goofed. Today, the trouble started with the shuttle's door.
The problem is that only one of the micro switches on the door indicates it's closed.
Technicians tried to remove the door's handle, but failed because a small screw was stuck. So the call went out for a drill. When it finally arrived, 35 minutes later, the batteries were too weak to operate it.
The proper drill has now arrived in the White Room,
but the bit on the new drill crumbled. Finally, a hacksaw was brought in to cut off part of the handle. But by this time, the winds had picked up at both the launch pad and the emergency landing site.
Currently, those winds are in excess of acceptable limits.
After another 2-hour wait, the 7 weary astronauts climbed out of the shuttle and were told with NASA's tight 1986 schedule, they will try again tomorrow. But the forecast calls for freezing temperatures that could cause another postponement. Bruce Hall, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
But this morning, the handle would not budge.
Okay, we got a problem on removing one of the screws on the milk stool. It seems to be stripped.
NASA workmen called for a power drill to unscrew the latch altogether. When the drill finally arrived an hour later, its batteries were dead. So the workmen finally decided to pull out a hacksaw. By the time the handle was sawed off, clouds and gusty winds had moved over the launch pad. Conditions unacceptable for liftoff.
We have scrubbed the launch attempt for today.
Despite the scrub, the crew, including school teacher Krista McAuliffe, were reported in good spirits, but not the visiting school children from McAuliffe's hometown.
I was disappointed. I was really mad that it didn't go off.
NASA will try again for a launch tomorrow morning, but tonight a hard freeze is predicted that could damage water and fuel lines on the launch pad and further delay Challenger's liftoff. John Quinones, ABC News, the Kennedy Space Center.
At Cape Canaveral today, the Space Shuttle Challenger ran into still more problems, and that forced still another delay in efforts to put the first school teacher into space. The flight of Krista McAuliffe now has been put off 5 times. And NBC's Dan Molina reports tonight there are worries that it may be put off again tomorrow.
In the end, it was a stiff Florida wind that kept Challenger on the launch pad today. Winds like this would have made an emergency landing very dangerous. It all started out well. Teacher Krista McAuliffe and her crewmates marched up to the launch pad in the pre-dawn hours. Up at Krista's school in Concord, New Hampshire, they crowded into the cafeteria to watch the big event on television. Then came the exasperating mishap. A handle attached to the outside of the shuttle's hatch had to be unscrewed and removed before takeoff as usual. Today, the threads of one screw were stripped. The call went out for the tools any home handyman would use, a big drill and a hacksaw. They went through 2 drills, they broke a drill bit. Finally, they got the handle off, but by then the wind had kicked up.
We are going to scrub for today, and we'll be letting the crew out of the orbiter, and they will go back to the crew quarters.
The crowd at the launch pad left. As to the students up in New Hampshire,
we're getting tired of it. We wanted to hurry up and go up so we can find out what it's going to be really like.
Maybe we'll get out of more school if it's not until Thursdays.
I think everybody's disappointed.
All this after NASA canceled yesterday's scheduled launch because the weather forecast looked bad, but turned out fine. Now the plan is to press ahead with yet another try tomorrow, but sub-freezing temperatures are forecast, and that could cause all sorts of problems. Dan Molina, NBC News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Shuttle Challenger was set to launch a little after 8:30 Houston time. Members of the launch pad crew, including one who wore a mortarboard and tassel in honor of teacher Krista McAuliffe, greeted the astronauts as they boarded the shuttle shortly before 7. At that point, everything was going smoothly.
Good morning, Krista, and have a fun flight.
Even the weather at the Cape and at potential landing sites around the world seem to be cooperating.
Roger. Nice, cool and clear.
But the trouble began when the ground crew tried to close the hatch. The handle is supposed to come off after the hatch is sealed, only it did not. A bolt was screwed in too tightly and wouldn't budge. So began the frustration for the Challenger crew as ground crew members tried to get the bolt loose.
We are working on it.
The ground crew sent for a drill and a hacksaw. A half hour later, the drill arrived. But that only brought more frustration. It had a dead battery. After more waiting, the hacksaw arrived at the pad, and the ground crew was finally able to remove the handle. But because of the delay, the shuttle Challenger had to wait again, this time so that navigation equipment could be recalibrated to compensate for the later launch time. That took an hour, long enough for another problem at the Cape, weather. That left the astronauts sitting on the pad again.
So we hope between now and 1 o'clock we'll get a good shot at it, but it doesn't look promising at this moment.
Strong winds swept the Cape. Some gusts of more than 30 miles an hour were recorded. That is unacceptable for NASA because it is too rough for an emergency landing at the Cape if the shuttle should have to make an immediate return. And finally, the mission was called off for at least another day.
We are going to scrub 4 today.
The Challenger crew left the shuttle disappointed. There is some chance of a launch tomorrow, but at this point, it looks like Florida may be in for some record cold temperatures. That could cause yet another delay in the launch. That will be decided tonight. Nancy Holland, 11 News.